Have you ever wondered what happens after you sign the papers to buy a house? As a realtor, this is one of the questions that I'm most often asked about. Buying a home is a big deal, and there are many steps that have to take place before you actually get those keys. Today, we're going to look at the process. We're going to break it down into simple steps, which transition you from the moment that you accept your offer to the closing day or move-in day when you actually get those keys. Welcome to Realty Bytes, conversations on real estate and lifestyle, and I'm your host, Evelyn Lopes. Today, we're going to look at what happens from agreement to closing. So, as I mentioned, there are numerous steps that take place in order to get you from actually viewing a home to putting the agreement in place to accepting that agreement and to the actual final step, which is the move-in date and those keys in your hands. So the first step is really dealing with the paperwork, and there is a lot of paperwork in real estate. And we also have to keep in mind that everything that people or the parties agree to within a real estate transaction is always in writing. So first, the buyer and seller will sign a contract called the Agreement of Purchase and Sale. And this document spells out in writing everything about the purchase of the house, including the legal description of the property, the agreed upon purchase price, the amount of deposit that will be submitted, and any conditions that are also part of this agreement. And conditions could include things like conditional on financing, home inspection, status review if it's a condo, potentially a water test if it's a country property, or the sale of the purchaser's property. And each of these conditions will have time limit in which they need to be completed within. So both parties, buyer and seller, need to ensure that they're doing their due diligence, working towards fulfilling these conditions. And once these conditions are met, then paperwork will be drawn up indicating yes, the condition has been met, or no, the condition has not been met. So essentially, this paperwork, the agreement, will also detail how much you're paying for the house, the closing date or the day in which you plan to move into the home, and the amount of deposit, as I said. So this is all detailed in that agreement. And in terms of the deposit you have to remember does two things. First of all, demonstrates the buyer's good faith, and it also demonstrates the financial means or capability for the buyers to actually purchase this house. And once the agreement is signed and agreed upon in full by both parties, the buyer and seller, and the deposit can be submitted in one of two ways. It can either accompany the offer, or it can be submitted within 24 hours of the agreement being signed. After the deposit is submitted, now the buyer and the seller are going to go to work to do their due diligence. Now, step number 2 we're going to talk about is the mortgage or the financing. So unless you can pay for the whole house in cash, you'll more than likely need a loan, which is called a mortgage. And ideally, the buyer will have already spoken to their banking or lending institution about this financing. They will have needed to provide details about their job, how much money they make, how long they've been there, their status of employment. So are they an employee, an independent contractor, their own business person? And they'll also have to indicate any debts they may have. And the lender will also review borrower's credit history to assess their risk in repaying that loan. And lastly, the buyer will also have to provide proof of their down payment. So the lender will take all of this information and they will decide whether or not they are prepared to give the financing to the purchaser or the buyer. As I said, usually done within 5 business days. Another condition of an offer, which is very typical, is the home inspection. So this is where you check the house as a buyer. So before you say yes for sure, you want to make sure that the house is in good shape. And you'll do this through a home inspection. This is where you hire a skilled and qualified home inspector to look for any potential problems with the property. They will look at the home's structural integrity and the home's mechanical components, such as the heating, cooling, plumbing, and electrical systems. And once the buyer is satisfied with the home inspection, they will then notify the seller in writing that everything is okay, or they may say that it's not okay say and they don't want to proceed with the purchase, or they may say that there's a couple of things wrong with the house and Mr. Seller, are you willing to fix those items? But whatever their decision is, it will be in writing to the other party in the form of either a notice of fulfillment or a waiver of the condition or potentially an amendment to the agreement of purchase and sale. So this is where your realtor will help guide you through, as I said, all of this paperwork that accompanies the purchase of a home. And you will also be hiring a lawyer when you're purchasing a home here in the province of Ontario. And the lawyer is hired to actually close the sale. So they will do a variety of tasks, including checking that the person selling the home really owns it and that there are no legal issues such as unpaid taxes or judgments against the property, and that the seller is able to transfer title and ownership to the buyer free and clear. And this is done through a title search. The lawyer will also coordinate the funds from the lending institution to the seller's lawyer on the day of closing. So they will oversee all of those aspects of it. They'll do all of the paperwork and actually close the deal and then register the buyer on title on closing day as the new owners. Now, before you actually purchase the house, there's going to be some different money issues that are going to come into place. So these are the financial aspects that need to be sorted out. This means that the bank will give you the loan money. You may have to pay some other fees such as land transfer taxes, utility adjustments, and all of this money needs to go to the right places so that you can actually buy the house. And this is where your lawyer will come into play to make sure that everything is distributed as it should be. And then your lawyer will meet with you to sign off all of the final paperwork. And this usually occurs 2 to 3 days before closing. Another step that will happen usually just before closing is your final walkthrough of the property. And this is where you'll go through the house one more time and note that it needs to be provided as a right of re-entry within the agreement of purchase and sale. And this final walkthrough, when you go through the house, usually 2 or 3 days before closing, is your last chance to actually go through the property to ensure that everything is as you agreed, that there's no damage or that nothing is broken or missing. So, for example, if you purchased the home and you included the appliances, that the appliances are still in the house and that the appliances are still working. So what I always recommend when you go through that final walkthrough, and you try to do it as close as possible to the day of closing, but the day of closing is not the day to do it. You probably want to do it a day or two before. You go in, you look at the house, you check any appliances that you may have purchased with that agreement. So you turn on the stove, you turn on the oven, you turn on the dryer, you make sure everything is working, you make sure there's no damage to the walls or floors, and that everything is good. If something is not good, like the fridge or the stove is missing, this is where you can then notify your lawyer before closing day so that they can notify the seller's lawyer that things are missing and everything can get fixed before you have actually physically given the seller their money. And the last step is actually on the day of closing. So this is when the buyer's lawyer will transfer the funds to the seller's lawyer and money will be exchanged for keys. And the seller will be removed from title and the new buyer will be then registered on title. And so this is the last step and the best one. Now, once these details have been taken care of, you'll actually get the keys to your new home. Keep in mind that most transactions close in the afternoon and the exact time of closing is unknown. It could be as late as 5 o'clock. So if you are moving and you're actually having a mover do the physical move for you, you want to keep that in mind, that you don't actually know the time you're going to get those keys. So if you have a small move to do and it's not too far from your previous place where you lived, you want to make sure that you don't have the movers come in first thing in the morning and they're going to be finished putting all your stuff in the truck by 10 or 11 o'clock and then they're sitting there from 11, 12, 1, 2, and you don't get the keys till 5 o'clock, especially if you're paying the movers by the hour. So try to time that together. And you can always ask your lawyer if there's any way that they could arrange to have an early morning closing. They can't guarantee it because it's going to depend on both lawyers' schedules and whether everything is in place, the financing or funds have been transferred and are sitting and waiting first thing in the morning. It may also be a reflection of a series of transactions that are happening. So for example, you as a buyer are buying a new house from the seller, but you have a house that needs to close. And the people that are buying your house have a house they have to close. So funds for that last deal don't get transferred until all of those other deals have closed. So that's why sometimes it's later in the day. So keep that in mind as well when you are arranging or preparing for closing day. And once those funds have been transferred and title has been exchanged, you'll get those wonderful keys in your hand and the house will officially be yours. So again, buying a house might seem complicated, but it really doesn't have to be. It's easier when you know what to expect. So if you're thinking about buying a home in Ontario, you now have a roadmap to guide you through the process. Knowing what each step involves will help you feel confident in the process, going from the agreement to the actual closing. Now, I'm going to put in the show notes a link to a PDF download, which is basically a roadmap of all of the steps that are involved in this transition from agreement to closing, so that you have it on hand to help you seamlessly go through the process. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll also put my contact information in the notes below. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes of our podcast, Realty Bytes Conversations on Real Estate and Lifestyle, feel free to reach out to me. Until next time, signing off for today.